The smell of fresh concrete and betrayal has a very particular scent. Trust me, I've been breathing it for 6 months. They built 15 commercial buildings worth $40 million on my land, while I sipped morning coffee and counted every nail they hammered into their own coffin. Right now, Veronica Blackwood is standing 50 yards from my kitchen window, posing for news cameras in front of her grand achievement, the sharp click of her designer heels echoing off the asphalt that buried my wife Sarah's prized tomato garden. This woman, HOA president and part-time Satan, thought she'd found the perfect victim. Grieving widower, simple electrician, probably too stupid to read the fine print. She spent 18 months weaving legal webs and greasing city hall palms to steal what wasn't hers. But that rusty lockbox on my counter holds papers older than her great-grandmother, and I'm about to turn her $1 million victory parade into the most expensive property law lesson Colorado has ever witnessed. What would you do if they stole your land? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I bet your HOA has tried something shady too. Let me tell you how I got here, because nobody wakes up one day and finds themselves in a war with their neighborhood's self-appointed dictator. My name's Garrett Mills, and this 40-acre piece of Colorado prairie has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather bought it in 1987 with his life savings, dirt cheap because nobody wanted farmland that smelled like cattle and sounded like coyotes. Just rolling grassland, a modest farmhouse with floorboards that creak out Morse code when you walk, and a red barn that leans like it's tired of standing up straight. Sarah and I raised chickens here, grew tomatoes that actually tasted like sunshine, and watched sunsets that'd make an atheist reconsider. Every morning I'd wake to the sound of our rooster Earl, named after my father-in-law because both were loud, obnoxious, and impossible to ignore. Sarah died 3 years ago. Cancer. The kind that gives you false hope before gut-punching you back to reality. Those last months, she handled all our paperwork because my hands shake when I'm stressed, and legal documents make about as much sense to me as quantum physics. I'm an electrician. Give me tangled wires, and I'll sort them out. Give me contracts, and I might as well be reading ancient Sumerian. After Sarah passed, the silence got heavier than lead. I kept her morning routine, feed chickens at dawn, tend the vegetable garden she planted with military precision, sit on the porch swing that still smells faintly of her lavender hand lotion. The coffee pot still makes enough for 2 because hope dies harder than habits. Meanwhile, our slice of nowhere was getting swallowed by suburban sprawl. Heritage Oaks subdivisions sprouted around my property like expensive weeds. McMansions with 3-car garages and lawns so artificially green they'd make a golf course jealous. Property taxes jumped 400% faster than my pension could handle. These new neighbors formed an HOA when their subdivision incorporated, and somehow my land got grandfathered into their rules, even though I'm technically outside their kingdom. Enter Veronica Blackwood, the woman who probably irons her yoga pants and schedules her bathroom breaks. 45, drives a white Tesla she parks sideways to claim maximum territory, and carries herself like she invented oxygen. Real estate attorney by day, HOA dictator by choice, married to City Councilman Bradley Blackwood. A political connection more valuable than gold when you need permits rubber-stamped or regulations bent into pretzels. She appeared at my door last spring, wearing a smile sharper than barbed wire and perfume expensive enough to fund a small country. Said she needed my signature on routine paperwork for a utility easement update. Just infrastructure improvements, nothing that would disturb my rustic lifestyle. The documents looked official, county letterhead, enough legal jargon to choke a lawyer. Here's a lesson that cost me everything. Never sign documents while you're grieving. Predators can smell vulnerability from 3 counties away. Always get independent legal review, even for routine paperwork. I should have called a lawyer. Should have done what Sarah always did when someone wanted signatures. Instead, I signed, listening to that pen scratch across paper like fingernails on a coffin lid. 48 hours later, surveyors invaded my land with GPS equipment and orange stakes, marking territory like wolves. They planted flags across Sarah's vegetable garden, around my chicken coop, even next to Earl's favorite dust bath. When I asked what was happening, the crew chief, decent guy named Danny, winced. Lady with the Tesla says this is all HOA property now. I drove straight to the county clerk's office, where the air tastes like old paper and broken dreams under fluorescent lights that hum funeral dirges. 3 hours of digging through records revealed Veronica's master plan, that routine easement transferred development rights to 35 of my 40 acres. Bradley had pre-approved zoning changes, reclassifying my agricultural land as mixed-use commercial. The HOA could now seize any unused property within their expanded boundaries for community benefit. I'd been outplayed by a professional chess player while I was still learning checkers, and judging by the construction equipment arriving that afternoon, she was ready for her victory lap. The construction equipment arrived like an invasion force, diesel monsters belching black smoke across what used to be Sarah's wildflower meadow. I woke up that Thursday to the beep 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 of a backhoe reversing over the exact spot where Sarah and I had our first kiss 30 years ago. The sound of progress, Veronica would probably call it. To me, it sounded like grave digging. By 6 a.m., a full surveying crew had spread across my land like ants on a dropped ice cream cone. Orange stakes sprouted everywhere, through my vegetable garden, around the chicken coop where Earl held court, even next to the old oak tree where Sarah used to read on summer afternoons. The crew chief, Danny, looked apologetic as hell, but orders were orders. Then she arrived. Veronica pulled up in her Range Rover. Apparently the Tesla wasn't rugged enough for actual dirt, wearing designer jeans that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She strode across my property with architectural drawings tucked under her arm like she was Moses carrying down commandments, her expensive boots crunching through the frost-covered grass. "Mr. Mills," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone rich people use when they're pretending to be reasonable. "You'll need to relocate your agricultural activities to the designated 5-acre homestead zone." She pointed to a patch of land that included my house, the immediate yard, and about enough space to grow a decent tomato plant. Everything else, the barn, the pasture where I'd planned to get a couple of horses someday, Sarah's carefully planned herb garden that still smelled like rosemary and thyme, all of it was apparently theirs now. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest like steam in a pressure cooker. "I think there's been some confusion about property lines." She smiled, that patronizing smile people practice in mirrors. "Mr. Mills, I understand change can be difficult, but this development will bring significant value to the entire community. Your property values will increase substantially. Property values. Because that's what matters when someone's bulldozing your wife's memorial garden." That night, I did something I hadn't done since high school geometry class. I studied. Spread those survey maps across my kitchen table next to Sarah's reading glasses, measuring distances with a ruler and comparing them to my original 1987 deed. The smell of instant coffee and growing suspicion filled the air as I worked by lamplight. And that's when I found it. Their survey was wrong. Not just a little wrong, spectacularly, legally, impossibly wrong. Those orange stakes weren't just marking my property. They'd included a 1/4 acre of my neighbor's land, including Ezra Kowalski's fishing pond. I remembered what my electrician instructor used to say about building permits. Measure twice, cut once, because one mistake invalidates everything. Apparently, the same rule applied to property surveys. Ezra's a retired Marine who moved here 5 years back for the quiet and the fishing. Guy's built like a refrigerator and has the kind of calm that comes from seeing real combat. If Veronica thought she could intimidate a man who'd survived 3 tours in Afghanistan, she was about to get schooled. Friday morning, Ezra and I struck back. We met at dawn with bright pink surveyor's tape, metal stakes, and my original deed. Following the property lines exactly as described in the legal documents, not Veronica's fantasy version, we marked the true boundaries. Then we set up folding chairs right on the corrected property line with a cooler full of coffee and the kind of determination that only comes from being royally pissed off. The construction crew arrived for another day of trespassing to find 2 men sitting calmly in their path, steam rising from our coffee cups in the morning chill. Danny, the crew chief, scratched his head and made some phone calls. 10 minutes later, Veronica's Range Rover came tearing down the dirt road, kicking up dust clouds that settled on everything like guilt. "You cannot interfere with a legal survey," she shrieked, climbing out in yoga pants and Ugg boots. Apparently she'd been interrupted during her morning meditation, or whatever rich people do at dawn. Ezra, deadpan as week-old bread, looked up from his thermos. "Ma'am, last I checked, sitting on your own property wasn't illegal in America. This is HOA property now. You're trespassing." I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 52 years, but also feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. The satisfaction of being absolutely, legally right. "Actually, Veronica, your survey crew made a significant error." I pointed to where their stakes had claimed Ezra's pond, the morning sun glinting off the water that clearly sat on his side of the fence. "See that water? That's on Mr. Kowalski's deed, not yours. which means your entire survey is worthless. Her face went through several interesting color changes, pink to red to something approaching eggplant purple. The sound of her grinding teeth was audible over the idling construction equipment. "I'm calling the police," she declared, pulling out her phone like it was a loaded weapon. "Please do," I replied, settling back into my folding chair. "I'd love to show Deputy Martinez my deed versus your fantasy map." 20 minutes later, Deputy Sheriff Martinez, same guy who'd helped me with a drunk driver last year, examined both sets of markers and confirmed what I already knew. My property lines were correct according to county records. The survey crew packed up their equipment, muttering about conflicting information and needing lawyers to sort this mess out. Veronica retreated to her Range Rover, but not before taking photos of everything with her phone, the camera clicking like an angry insect. As she drove away, tires spinning in the gravel and leaving ruts that would take weeks to heal, I knew this was just round one. That evening, a certified letter arrived. Notice of HOA violation, unauthorized property markers, fine, $500 for vandalism of community survey equipment. Ezra read it over my shoulder and chuckled, the sound rumbling up from his chest like distant thunder. "She's testing you, brother. Question is, how far are you willing to let her go?" I looked out at those pink stakes marking what was mine, thought about Sarah's garden buried under those orange flags, and made a decision that would change everything. As far as it takes, Ezra. As far as it takes. The certified letters started arriving like clockwork, one every 3 days, each more ridiculous than the last. Violation notice, grass height exceeds community standards. Apparently my lawn was 2 inches too tall in the back corner, where nobody but satellites could see it. Fine, $200. Violation notice, unsightly agricultural structure. They meant my chicken coop, which had been standing since before their subdivision was even a developer's wet dream. Fine, $300. Violation notice, unlicensed commercial activity. This one made me laugh out loud. They were calling my little roadside vegetable stand an illegal business. The same stand where Sarah used to sell tomatoes for 50 cents a pound to help pay for her cancer treatments. Fine, $500. Each letter arrived with the ceremonial pomp of certified mail, requiring my signature like I was signing my own execution warrant. The mailman, old Pete Rodriguez, started giving me sympathetic looks. "Another one, Garrett?" he'd say, shaking his head. "These people got nothing better to do?" The total damage, $3,400 in fines, with a threat to place a lien on my property if I didn't pay within 30 days. I discovered their secret weapon when I called the HOA attorney's office. Turns out the lawyer handling my case was Veronica's former law school roommate. Funny how these coincidences work out when you're the one orchestrating them. But while Veronica was playing games with certified mail, I was doing real homework. The Millbrook Heights City Hall smells like old paper and broken promises with fluorescent lights that buzz like dying insects. I spent 3 days there, digging through public records with the determination of an archaeologist hunting treasure. My back ached from hunching over filing cabinets, and my eyes burned from reading microfilm until the words blurred together. What I found was better than gold. The HOA had filed for something called special district status, basically legal superpowers that let them tax residents and enforce regulations like a mini-government. I remembered Sarah once telling me about a contractor who tried to overcharge us for electrical work. "Always check their credentials, Garrett. Scammers count on people not asking the right questions." Same principle applied here. Colorado law requires 60% resident approval for special district designation. The HOA claimed 100% approval from all residents, but they'd never notified me, or 3 other original landowners who predated their subdivision. When I cross-referenced the notification requirements with the actual notices sent, the HOA had held their formation meeting on a Tuesday at 2 p.m. Perfect timing if you want to exclude anyone who works for a living. I found myself a lawyer, Meredith Cruz, fresh out of law school and working at the legal aid office downtown. 26 years old, drowning in student loans, and hungry enough to take on a case that bigger firms would run from. Her office smelled like burnt coffee and stress sweat, with law books held together by duct tape and pure determination. "This is better than any case study they gave us in law school," she said, spreading the documents across her cluttered desk like a general planning battle strategy. They screwed up the formation process 6 ways from Sunday. We filed a formal challenge to the HOA's special district status with the Colorado Secretary of State, demanding an audit of their formation documents. Meredith worked nights and weekends surviving on energy drinks and righteous indignation, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard like a pianist performing a concert. But Veronica wasn't going quietly. She hired a private security company called Sentinel Solutions, basically rent-a-cops with delusions of grandeur. They started patrolling the neighborhood in white SUVs with enough light bars to land aircraft, conducting wellness checks on my property twice daily. The head guard, Miguel, would apologize quietly while taking photos of my property. "Ladies paying us overtime to document anything that might be a violation," he whispered during one of these theatrical inspections, the sound of his camera clicking like an angry cricket. "Sorry, man. Bills are bills." They photographed everything. My mailbox angle, garden hose placement, even the precise location of Earl's favorite dust bath. Every picture became evidence in another violation notice, another fine, another attempt to bleed me dry through legal paper cuts. The neighborhood split like a wishbone under pressure. Working families and retirees, people who remembered when this was farm country, started showing quiet support. They'd wave from their driveways or leave anonymous notes tucked under my windshield wipers. But the new money crowd lined up behind Veronica like soldiers following orders to war. Then Meredith called with news that changed the game. "Garrett, I found something huge," she said, her voice electric with excitement. "Colorado Statute 38-33.3-209. HOAs cannot enforce regulations on property that exists outside their legal boundaries. Even with your easement, your homestead remains outside their jurisdiction." I stopped paying their fines. Every certified letter got returned with "refused" stamped across it in red ink. Every violation notice went straight into the trash, unopened, the sound of paper hitting the bottom satisfying as a perfect golf swing. Veronica's response was swift and nuclear, an emergency HOA board meeting to discuss the problem resident situation. The meeting notice was posted only on the subdivision entrance sign, where I'd never see it unless I was specifically looking. But Ezra was always looking. Military guys develop networks like spider webs, invisible until you walk into them. 3 days later, the certified letter that arrived wasn't another violation notice. It was a formal notice of eminent domain proceedings. The HOA board had voted 4-1 to seize my remaining 35 acres for essential community infrastructure. The proposed compensation? $50,000 for land worth at least $400,000. Ezra read it over my shoulder and whistled low, the sound cutting through the morning air like a blade. "Well, brother, looks like she just went from stupid to felony-level stupid. You ready to show her what a real fight looks like?" I folded the letter carefully, feeling the weight of what was coming, and smiled for the first time in weeks. "Ezra, I think it's time to remind Miss Blackwood that some ropes are actually nooses." The eminent domain paperwork read like a ransom note dressed up in legal language. "Notice of intent to acquire private property for community benefit," it proclaimed in bold letters, as if capitalizing the words made the theft more legitimate. The HOA board, all 4 members who'd voted yes, claimed my 35 acres were needed for essential community infrastructure, a community center, expanded parking, and something called a commercial pavilion for resident services, $50,000. That's what they offered for land that any decent appraiser would value at 10 times that amount. The smell of fresh ink on the documents mixed with my morning coffee and the lingering scent of Earl's breakfast scraps, creating an aroma I'd forever associate with legalized robbery. But something about their language bothered me like a splinter under the skin. Commercial pavilion sounded awfully fancy for a community center. So I did what any suspicious electrician would do. I went digging for the real story. The county recorder's office keeps public records of all land transactions and development agreements. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like angry wasps as I spent 4 hours searching through files that smelled like dust and forgotten dreams. My fingers grew black with ink from old carbon copies, but I struck gold in a folder marked Pending Commercial Development Applications, Purchase Agreements, 3 of them. Veronica's real estate company had contracts with a major pharmacy chain, a coffee franchise, and something called Heritage Marketplace LLC. The community center was actually a planned strip mall, and those retail tenants were prepared to pay premium rent for prime location access. Sarah always said that when someone lies to your face, they usually tell the truth somewhere else. The scratching of my pen as I copied down the contract details sounded like her saying, "I told you so," from beyond the grave. I remembered reading about a Supreme Court case in Connecticut. Some grandmother who lost her house so a developer could build condos. After that, most states passed laws protecting property owners from exactly this kind of corporate theft. Colorado's version was crystal clear. No eminent domain for private commercial benefit, period. When I called Meredith with my discovery, the excitement in her voice crackled through the phone like electricity through copper wire. Garrett, this is smoking gun evidence. We can get an injunction filed by tomorrow morning. But I had a different idea. Sometimes the best way to catch a thief is to let them steal something worthless while you're watching. Let's hold off on the injunction for now, I told her, watching a red-tailed hawk circle over what used to be Sarah's sunflower field. I want to see how deep this rabbit hole goes. The next morning brought another surprise. A white pickup truck parked in my driveway with Environmental Solutions, Inc. painted on the doors. A guy in a polo shirt and clipboard approached my front porch, his expensive boots crunching on the gravel Sarah and I had laid ourselves 15 years ago, each stone chosen for how it caught the morning light. "Mr. Mills? I'm here to conduct a routine environmental assessment of your septic system. HOA regulation requires periodic groundwater testing in rural properties. I'd been an electrician for 30 years. When someone shows up unannounced claiming routine anything, it's usually routine bullshit. But I let him do his testing, watching as he collected soil samples with the precision of a crime scene investigator. The whole process felt theater-like, performed for an audience of one. 3 days later, another certified letter arrived with the weight of bad news. Environmental hazard notice. Elevated nitrate levels detected. According to their report, my septic system was contaminating groundwater and posed a public health risk. The solution? Immediate connection to city sewer lines at my expense. Estimated cost, $15,000. The paper felt expensive between my fingers, the kind of stock that costs extra to make lies look official. I hired my own environmental testing company, a local outfit run by Carl Henderson, who'd been testing well water since before environmental consulting became a growth industry. Carl showed up in coveralls that actually had dirt on them, driving a truck that looked like it had seen real work. His results showed normal nitrate levels well within EPA guidelines. When we compared the GPS coordinates, we discovered something interesting. Their contaminated samples had been taken from a spot 50 yards away from my actual septic system, right next to where my neighbor's Great Dane liked to conduct his daily constitutional. Manufacturing evidence is a federal crime. Falsifying environmental reports can cost you your license and land you in prison. But apparently, Veronica was feeling desperate enough to play with fire and gasoline. At the next HOA meeting, this one properly noticed because too many people were paying attention now, Veronica stood up in front of 60-plus residents. The community center's air conditioning wheezed like an old man climbing stairs, mixing sweat and anxiety into a cocktail that could choke you. "Sometimes," she declared, her voice carrying that tone politicians use when they're about to screw you, "individual interests must yield to the greater good. Mr. Mills's refusal to embrace positive change threatens our entire community's future." Individual interests, like the right to own property without having it stolen by your neighbors. As I sat in the back of that overheated room listening to Veronica paint me as the villain in her story, I fingered the manila folder containing those retail purchase agreements. The paper was warm against my palm, heavy with the weight of her lies. Let her dig deeper, I thought. Let her get so committed to this fraud that the truth would bury her completely. Because Sarah taught me something else about dealing with bullies. Sometimes you have to let them hang themselves with their own rope. The noose was tightening. Veronica just didn't know she was the one wearing it. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor darker than burnt coffee on a February morning. I was organizing Sarah's papers for the legal case, knee-deep in file folders that smelled like her lavender sachets and 3 years of dust, when I found the metal lockbox I'd forgotten existed. It was tucked behind her sewing machine in the back corner of our bedroom closet, heavy as a guilty conscience and locked tighter than a banker's vault. The key was on Sarah's keyring, the one I'd been carrying in my pocket for 3 years because letting go felt like losing her twice. The lock clicked open with a sound like fate clearing its throat, the metal cold against my fingertips. Inside were 3 documents that would change everything. The first was my grandfather's original 1887 homestead deed, yellowed with age and written in the careful script of a man who understood that words on paper could mean the difference between prosperity and poverty. The ink had faded to sepia, but the boundaries were clear. Nothing surprising there. I'd seen copies before. The second document made me sit down hard on Sarah's hope chest, the wood creaking under my weight like it was sharing my shock. A 1923 deed showing that the original homeowner had sold the surface rights to the property, but kept the mineral rights. Standard practice back then when oil and gas were becoming Colorado's buried treasure. But the third document, dated 1987, the year my grandfather bought the place, that's what made my hands shake like I was holding lightning in a thunderstorm. My grandfather hadn't just bought the surface rights to 40 acres. He'd bought the mineral rights too, both deeds combined into one transaction, giving him complete ownership of everything from the grassroots to the molten core of the earth, and I'd inherited it all. I spread the documents across our kitchen table, the same table where Sarah used to pay bills and plan our modest retirement, her reading glasses still sitting in the wooden bowl where she'd left them. The morning sun slanted through the window, illuminating the faded ink that held the power to destroy Veronica's entire scheme. The legal implications hit me like revelation wrapped in irony. I remembered my grandfather telling stories about mineral rights when I was a kid, how smart landowners in Colorado always kept what was underground, because you never knew what might be valuable someday. He used to say, "Surface rights feed you today, mineral rights feed your grandchildren forever." But here's the beautiful part that made my coffee taste like victory. The mineral rights extended beyond my original 40 acres. According to the 1887 boundaries, they covered a total of 60 acres, including 20 acres that now housed 47 homes in the Heritage Oaks subdivision. Veronica had built her little kingdom on land she thought she controlled, never knowing that every foundation, every basement, every septic system had been constructed over mineral rights that belonged to a family she'd never bothered to research, rights that had never been granted to anyone. Colorado is what lawyers call a mineral rights paramount state, meaning what's underground matters more than what's on top when it comes to legal disputes. Any construction that went deeper than surface level, and modern foundations definitely qualified, required permission from the mineral rights owner. I called Meredith, my voice steady, despite the earthquake happening in my chest. "I need you to research Colorado mineral rights law. Specifically, what happens when someone builds without permission." Her research confirmed what my grandfather's stories had taught me. Colorado courts consistently favor mineral rights holders in property disputes. Any construction that interfered with subsurface rights could be considered trespassing. The mineral rights owner could demand either removal of the improvements or compensation for their use. In legal terms, I owned the ground beneath Veronica's feet, but I made a decision that would have made Sarah proud. I kept my mouth shut and let them keep digging. Every morning, I'd sit on my porch with coffee and that lockbox, watching millions of dollars in construction equipment work for my benefit, while Veronica strutted around like she owned the world. The smell of fresh concrete that had annoyed me for months now carried the sweet scent of approaching justice. Each foundation they poured was another nail in their own coffin, another dollar they'd never recover. Sarah's voice echoed in my memory. "Patience, Garrett. Let them dig their own graves." So I waited and watched, and let Veronica build the most expensive mistake in Colorado history, one concrete pour at a time. War councils, I discovered, work best when they smell like fresh cornbread and strong coffee, with just a hint of righteous indignation seasoning the air. My kitchen became headquarters for what Ezra dubbed Operation Concrete Justice. Every evening at 6, my unlikely team would gather around the same scarred oak table where Sarah used to plant our vegetable garden, now covered with legal documents, construction photos, and enough evidence to sink Veronica's battleship. The cast of characters would have made Hollywood proud. Meredith Cruz arrived each night like a caffeinated tornado, laptop held together by duct tape and pure determination, her fingers flying across keys with the intensity of a pianist performing her final concert. Student loans the size of a mortgage had given her the hunger to take down institutional bullies, and Veronica represented everything wrong with the legal system. The smell of her gas station coffee mixed with my home brew, creating an aroma that somehow made constitutional law seem approachable. Ezra Kowalski brought military precision that would have impressed Eisenhower. Former Marine intelligence officer with a network spider-webbed across 3 counties and the patience to watch paint dry if it posed a security threat. He'd mapped Veronica's routine so thoroughly he knew she ordered a grande skinny vanilla latte at exactly 7:15 a.m., and that her husband Bradley played poker with city officials every Thursday night at the Elks Lodge. Then there was Dorothy Dot Patterson, 78 years old and tougher than overcooked beef jerky. Retired county clerk who'd organized every municipal filing system since the Nixon administration, Dot could find a specific document in a haystack of bureaucracy faster than Google could find cat videos. Her color-coded files made the Pentagon look disorganized, and her handwriting was so precise it could have been carved by machines. Our newest recruit was Marcus Webb, freelance journalist whose nose for corruption could sniff out graft from orbit. He'd been tracking HOA abuse across Colorado like a bloodhound following a scent trail, documenting how wealthy development steamrolled property rights with the efficiency of Sherman's march to Atlanta. The way his eyes lit up when he saw our evidence reminded me of Earl spotting a particularly fat worm. The strategy we developed was surgical in its beautiful simplicity. Phase 1 meant documenting everything that moved, breathed, or left a paper trail. Meredith filed protective motions faster than Veronica could shred evidence, preserving every email, every financial record, every construction permit. We photographed vehicles, recorded conversations, and built a timeline more detailed than the Warren Commission report. I felt like a secret agent, except with better coffee and less chance of getting shot. Phase 2 involved building our coalition of the righteously pissed off. The Property Rights Alliance provided legal muscle and political connections that reached into the state capitol. Veterans for Justice rallied around Ezra's call to arms because, as he put it, if we can't protect property rights at home, what the hell did we fight overseas for? The Historic Preservation Society opposed commercial development on century-old farmland, bringing environmental lawyers who could tie up permits until the heat death of the universe. Phase 3 was all about controlling the narrative before Veronica could spin her web of lies. Marcus prepared his investigative series like Woodward and Bernstein preparing to topple a presidency, documenting not just my situation, but the cancer of HOA corruption metastasizing across Colorado. Social media campaigns were locked, loaded, and ready to trend. #Colorado property rights, #HOA corruption, hashtags that would spread faster than gossip at a church social. But the crown jewel was the mineral rights bombshell. Meredith had researched every angle with the thoroughness of a Supreme Court clerk, consulting professors who specialized in property law and mining regulations that dated back to territorial days. The legal precedent was more solid than the Rocky Mountains. Colorado Revised Statutes 3461-118 gave mineral rights holders supremacy over surface construction. Every foundation deeper than 3 feet required explicit permission from the subsurface owner, permission I had never granted and never would. Dot's financial archaeology revealed the scope of Veronica's desperation. City loans totaling $12 million based on projected tax revenue from my land. Personal guarantees that would bankrupt her if the project failed. A house of cards built on property she didn't actually control, like building a castle on quicksand during an earthquake. The timeline was perfect. Construction would reach the point of no return, 60% completion by mid-November. After that, stopping the project would be financially catastrophic for everyone involved. That's when we'd detonate our legal nuclear device. Each evening, as the construction crews packed up their equipment and the setting sun painted the half-built structures gold, I'd sit on my porch with Sarah's old coffee mug, watching millions of dollars being invested in buildings that legally belonged to me. The trap was elegant. Let Veronica dig herself so deep that climbing out would require bankrupting half the county, then produce the mineral rights deed and demand either removal of all structures or compensation that would make me wealthy enough to buy my own HOA. As October painted the cottonwoods amber and the first frost threatened the construction timeline, I felt Sarah's presence in the evening breeze. She'd always said that patience was the most powerful weapon against bullies. Veronica thought she was building a commercial empire. Instead, she was constructing the most expensive monument to hubris in Colorado history, one concrete pour at a time. November arrived with the kind of crisp bite that makes construction workers move faster and desperate HOA presidents make catastrophically stupid decisions. Veronica was riding higher than a kite in a tornado, drunk on what she thought was unstoppable momentum. The construction had reached 65% completion, past the financial point of no return where stopping would bankrupt everyone from here to Denver. She hosted an elaborate Heritage Oaks community development celebration at the country club, complete with ice sculptures carved to look like miniature buildings and champagne that probably cost more than my annual property taxes. The guest list read like a rogues gallery of local corruption: mayor, city council, potential retail tenants, and regional media covering what they believed was a heartwarming community transformation story. Veronica wore a designer suit that could have funded a small war, accepting congratulations like she'd just split the atom instead of stealing a widower's land. But success, as Sarah used to say, makes people sloppy as spilled paint. The mini twist came during foundation work on Building 7, the planned anchor store that would house a major pharmacy chain. Heavy machinery hit an underground spring that nobody's geological survey had bothered to detect, flooding the excavation site with water that smelled like earth, broken dreams, and very expensive mistakes. Work stopped for 3 days while engineers with clipboards and worried expressions assessed whether the entire foundation would need to be redesigned. The sound of industrial water pumps working overtime mixed with diesel exhaust and the growing panic of men who realized their timeline was slipping faster than a greased pig at a county fair. I documented every delay with the thoroughness of a crime scene photographer, every cost overrun, every frustrated conversation between contractors who knew they were being pushed beyond safe limits. Tommy Ricci, the construction foreman, started seeking me out during his smoke breaks like a man needing confession. "This whole job feels wrong, Mr. Mills," he said, cigarette smoke curling into the cold air like his doubts made visible. "Ladies pushing us to work faster than safe, cutting corners that'll come back to bite everyone involved. Been building for 20 years, and I've never seen someone so desperate to finish a project that they'd risk people getting hurt." That's when Veronica's desperation started showing through her designer facade like cracks in cheap makeup. She attempted to fast-track construction permits through her husband's city connections, pressuring Bradley to approve variance requests that should have required weeks of safety review. The smell of political corruption was stronger than the diesel fumes that drifted across my property each morning like an industrial breakfast. But her biggest mistake was launching a smear campaign that would have embarrassed a third-world dictator. Anonymous posts appeared on neighborhood Facebook groups claiming I'd been seen near construction equipment at night, suggesting I'd somehow caused the spring water flooding through suspicious activities. Photos of me walking my own property became evidence of sabotage attempts. One particularly creative post claimed I was drilling unauthorized wells to redirect groundwater and flood their foundations, like some kind of geriatric eco-terrorist with a vendetta against retail development. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. Veronica was so desperate to paint me as the villain that she'd forgotten the first rule of holes. When you're in one, stop digging. Meanwhile, my intelligence network was producing intelligence that would have made the Pentagon jealous. Ezra's contacts revealed that Veronica had hired a private investigator named Rex Manning to excavate dirt on my background. Rex was a former cop who'd left the force under circumstances involving evidence tampering. Exactly the kind of guy you hire when you need someone willing to color outside the legal lines. But Rex's investigation backfired more spectacularly than a 4th of July firework in a drought. Instead of finding scandals, he discovered 30 years of community service, helping neighbors with electrical problems for free, volunteering at the fire department, coaching Little League back when Sarah was alive, and our biggest worry was whether the concession stand had enough hot dogs. Rex actually called me directly, his voice carrying the weight of a man whose conscience was arm wrestling his paycheck. "Mr. Mills, I gotta level with you. Lady who hired me is bad news wrapped in expensive clothing. What she's asking me to do ain't right, and what I found about you makes her look like the villain in a Disney movie." That conversation revealed financial pressure that explained Veronica's increasingly unhinged behavior. She'd personally guaranteed construction loans totaling $7 million. Her real estate business was bleeding money from other failed investments, and Bradley was threatening divorce unless she solved their financial crisis before his political career became collateral damage. Community pressure was building like steam in a boiler with a broken relief valve. 3 HOA board members demanded emergency financial transparency meetings after discovering the true construction costs hidden in creative accounting. Environmental groups filed complaints about wetland destruction. The EPA received anonymous tips about improper waste disposal that had federal investigators asking uncomfortable questions. Veronica's response to mounting pressure was to double down on crazy like a gambler betting the farm on a pair of twos. She filed frivolous complaints, arranged harassment inspections, and spread rumors that would have made a middle school gossip blush. Every attack just documented her desperation while building community sympathy for the underdog fighting corruption. By Thanksgiving week, with construction crews working overtime to beat winter weather and retail tenants demanding completion guarantees, Veronica looked like a woman on the edge of a nervous breakdown, stress eating her way through what appeared to be designer clothing held together by pure anxiety. That's when I knew she was perfectly positioned for the final blow that would bring her empire crashing down like a house of cards in a hurricane. December brought the kind of cold that freezes everything except desperate people's bad decisions. Veronica had officially entered what psychologists probably call full meltdown mode. The construction was 95% complete, scheduled for a Black Friday grand opening that would either save her financial empire or destroy everyone involved in the spectacular failure. She'd announced successful pre-leasing of all 15 commercial units to regional media, positioning herself as the visionary leader who'd transformed unused farmland into Colorado's newest retail destination. The pressure was cooking her brain like an egg on August asphalt. Regional newspapers featured her as a finalist for Colorado HOA President of the Year, complete with glamour shots next to architectural renderings that made the strip mall look like a cross between the Taj Mahal and Disney World. She gave interviews about bold community leadership and bringing economic prosperity to rural Colorado. Her smile so practiced it probably had its own insurance policy. But behind the public relations theater, her world was collapsing faster than a house built on quicksand during an earthquake. The mini twist came from inside her own organization. Patricia Mumford, the HOA treasurer and a certified public accountant who actually understood numbers, discovered the true financial crater hidden beneath creative bookkeeping. The association would be $8 million in debt even if every retail lease succeeded, and that was assuming no cost overruns, no delays, and no lawsuits. Patricia demanded an emergency board meeting to review financial projections that looked like they'd been prepared by someone using magic markers and wishful thinking. 3 other board members threatened resignation unless an independent audit was conducted immediately. The smell of mutiny was stronger than the concrete dust that still drifted across the construction site. Veronica's response was to double down on desperate measures that would have embarrassed a Banana Republic dictator. She arranged for a city inspection of my electrical work, claiming anonymous complaints about safety violations that posed risks to the community. The inspector, a guy named Carl, who'd been doing electrical work since before Veronica was born, spent 2 hours examining my wiring and concluded that my electrical systems were textbook perfect and safer than most new construction. She filed a complaint with the agricultural department about my unlicensed produce sales, demanding immediate shutdown of the roadside stand where Sarah used to sell tomatoes to help pay for her cancer treatments. The agricultural inspector, a woman who actually knew the difference between a commercial farm and a hobby garden, dismissed the complaint as frivolous harassment of a legal agricultural operation. Then came the tree removal gambit. Veronica hired an arborist to claim that my century-old oak tree, the one where Sarah used to read on summer afternoons, was diseased and dangerous and must be removed immediately for public safety. The arborist's report read like science fiction, claiming the tree posed an imminent threat of catastrophic failure that could damage property and endanger lives. I hired my own tree expert, a professor from Colorado State University who specialized in heritage trees. His examination revealed a perfectly healthy oak that could stand for another century if left alone. The original report, he concluded, was either gross incompetence or deliberate fraud designed to harass the property owner. But Veronica's masterpiece of desperation was the attempted bribery. She requested a private meeting at a coffee shop in downtown Millbrook Heights, arriving in her Tesla like she was conducting international diplomacy instead of trying to buy off a retired electrician. The place smelled like overpriced coffee and her increasingly expensive perfume, probably chosen to mask the scent of fear. "Mr. Mills," she said, leaning across the table with the intensity of someone making a final offer, "I'm prepared to present a generous settlement that could benefit both of us significantly." Her offer? $200,000 for my remaining 5 acres, the homestead where Sarah and I had built our life together. Cash payment, immediate closing, and I could relocate anywhere I wanted with enough money to live comfortably. "Think about it," she pressed, her voice carrying that tone salespeople use when they're selling something nobody wants. "You could start fresh somewhere new without the stress of construction and development. This is my final offer before we proceed with eminent domain." I appeared to consider her proposal, requesting 48 hours to think it over, while recording our entire conversation on the device Ezra had taught me to use. Colorado is a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record any conversation I participated in. Meanwhile, the construction timeline had become a race against winter weather and financial collapse. Retail tenants were threatening contract cancellation due to delays. Construction loans had entered high-interest penalty phases that were bleeding money faster than a severed artery. The city was demanding completion by December 31st or permits would expire, requiring the entire process to restart. Environmental crisis added another layer of chaos. The spring water redirection had caused flooding in adjacent properties, while my land remained mysteriously dry. Federal investigators were examining wetland destruction complaints that could halt construction indefinitely. Marcus Webb called with news that made everything else seem trivial by comparison. "Garrett, the Attorney General's office just opened a criminal investigation into HOA fund misappropriation. Someone provided evidence of financial fraud that goes back 2 years. Rex Manning, the private investigator whose conscience had finally won the wrestling match with his wallet, had reported Veronica's request to manufacture evidence against me. The criminal investigation would examine not just the current project, but her entire tenure as HOA president. Veronica was now working 18-hour days, her health deteriorating so visibly that even her supporters were expressing concern. Weight loss, trembling hands, and erratic behavior that made board meetings feel like hostage negotiations. Her final, desperate gambit was an attempt to have me committed for mental health evaluation, filing paperwork claiming I was exhibiting signs of paranoia and potential violence that posed a threat to community safety. The irony was perfect. The woman who'd spent months manufacturing evidence and spreading lies was trying to claim that I was the one detached from reality. As the grand opening approached and media attention intensified, I sat in my kitchen each morning watching the sunrise paint the completed buildings gold while fingering the mineral rights deeds that would soon turn Veronica's triumph into the most expensive lesson in property law Colorado had ever witnessed. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. All that remained was springing it at the moment of maximum impact. Black Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that makes lies impossible to hide and truth shine like sunlight on fresh snow. The Heritage Oaks Commerce Center grand opening was orchestrated like a presidential inauguration. 200-plus attendees filled the parking lot that had been poured over Sarah's wildflower meadow, including the mayor, 3 city council members, and enough local media to cover a natural disaster. Red, white, and blue bunting fluttered in the cold breeze, and a red ribbon stretched across the main entrance like a finish line at the end of a very expensive race. Veronica stood center stage in a designer coat that probably cost more than most people's cars, holding golden scissors that caught the morning sun like a trophy. Corporate executives from the major retail tenants had flown in for the ribbon cutting, their presence guaranteeing that this moment would either launch Veronica into the stratosphere of success or crater her so hard she'd leave a smoking hole in Colorado soil. Local news crews broadcast live for what they expected to be a feel-good community development story. Channel 7's morning anchor gushed about transforming unused agricultural land into thriving economic opportunity, while camera operators positioned themselves for the perfect shot of civic progress in action. I arrived quietly in my 20-year-old pickup truck, wearing clean work clothes and carrying a manila folder alongside the small metal lockbox that had been waiting in my kitchen for this exact moment. Ezra, Meredith, and Marcus positioned themselves strategically throughout the crowd like pieces on a chessboard, ready for the coordinated strike that would topple a queen. The morning air smelled like excitement, expensive coffee, and the kind of anticipation that comes before someone's world ends in spectacular fashion. Veronica delivered her speech with the confidence of someone who believed she'd already won. Today we celebrate the transformation of unused farmland into a thriving community asset that will benefit every resident of Heritage Oaks and Millbrook Heights for generations to come, she declared, her voice carrying across the parking lot like a victory lap. She thanked cooperative landowners for embracing progress and community vision, taking full credit for the complex legal and financial negotiations that had made this development possible. The crowd applauded politely, unaware they were witnessing the final performance before the curtain fell. As Veronica raised the golden scissors for the ceremonial cut, I stepped forward from the back of the crowd. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice carrying clearly in the cold air, "but I think there's been a significant misunderstanding about this property." The crowd turned like a single organism, cameras swiveled to follow the disturbance, and Veronica's face transformed from triumph to terror in the space between heartbeats. The scissors froze midair as if time itself had stopped to watch what happened next. "These buildings," I continued, opening the manila folder with deliberate calm, "were constructed entirely on my private property without permission." I produced the surveyor's map with clearly marked boundaries, holding it high enough for cameras to capture. The crowd murmured like distant thunder as reporters rushed closer, their instincts recognizing a story bigger than a simple ribbon cutting. Veronica's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for water, but no words emerged. "But more importantly," I said, opening the metal lockbox with the same care a magician uses to reveal the final trick, "I own the mineral rights beneath this entire development." I held up the 1887 homestead deed, its yellowed paper seeming to glow in the television lights. Under Colorado law, mineral rights supersede surface construction. Every building here was constructed without subsurface permission. The silence was so complete you could hear individual snowflakes landing on the asphalt. Deputy Sheriff Martinez, the same officer who'd confirmed my property boundaries months earlier, approached to examine the documents. His expression grew more serious with each page as he confirmed their authenticity. "Ma'am," he said to Veronica, These deeds appear to be legitimate legal documents. That's when Marcus Webb stepped forward, press credentials visible, and the dam burst completely. "I'm Marcus Webb with the Colorado Springs Gazette," he announced, producing a digital recorder and smartphone. "Miss Blackwood, can you comment on the criminal investigation into HOA financial fraud that was announced this morning?" The phrase criminal investigation hit the crowd like a lightning strike. Corporate executives began quietly retreating toward their rental cars. City officials started having urgent whispered conversations with their lawyers. Local news crews realized they'd stumbled onto the story of the year. Veronica's meltdown was spectacular in its completeness. "This is fraud!" she screamed, pointing at me with shaking hands. "He's lying. This is my property. I have legal documents." "Ma'am," Deputy Martinez said with the patience of someone who dealt with plenty of public breakdowns, "you'll need to calm down so we can sort this out properly." But Veronica was beyond calm, beyond reason, beyond any connection to the reality that was crashing down around her like an avalanche. "Remove him," she demanded of the security guards she'd hired for the event. "This is private HOA property." The irony was perfect. The woman who'd spent months claiming my land was hers was now demanding that I be removed from property that legally belonged to me. As federal court papers were served halting all commercial operations and camera crews captured every moment of Veronica's public destruction, I addressed the crowd with the calm of someone who'd been waiting 6 months for this exact moment. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the stunned silence. "But sometimes you have to let bullies expose themselves before you can stop them." The golden scissors lay forgotten on the frozen asphalt, glinting in the morning sun like scattered dreams. The legal settlement took 3 months to negotiate, but the outcome was sweeter than Sarah's prize-winning strawberry jam served with a side of cosmic justice. I agreed to sell the mineral rights for $3.2 million, fair market value determined by independent appraisal, and about 64 times what Veronica had originally offered for my entire property. The retail tenants resumed their leases under a new ownership structure that gave the HOA 40% profit sharing, just enough to cover their debts and avoid the bankruptcy that would have destroyed dozens of innocent families. Colorado courts established legal precedent protecting mineral rights owners statewide, ensuring that what happened to me couldn't happen to other property owners who didn't know they were sitting on legal gold mines. Veronica's consequences were as spectacular as her public meltdown. She resigned from the HOA board in disgrace, facing criminal charges for financial fraud, conspiracy, and attempted extortion that would follow her like a bad credit score. Her marriage to Bradley survived barely, but his political career evaporated faster than morning dew in August heat. They moved to Arizona within 6 months, leaving behind a reputation that would stick to them like pine sap on hiking boots. The criminal investigation revealed 2 years of HOA fund misappropriation, totaling over $400,000. Civil lawsuits from defrauded HOA members ensured that Veronica's legal troubles would continue for years, like a subscription to misery that automatically renewed itself. But watching bullies get their comeuppance was nothing compared to what grew from the ashes of their corruption. The new HOA board, elected on a platform of transparency that would have given Veronica nightmares, operated with openness that made government meetings look secretive. Every financial decision required member approval. Every development proposal needed public hearings. Every board meeting was recorded and posted online for residents who preferred watching democracy from their couches. I became an unofficial consultant on property rights issues, and the phone calls came from across Colorado. Widows facing eminent domain, veterans fighting development pressure, families dealing with HOA bullies who thought legal letterhead made them invincible. Each case reminded me that Sarah's fight for justice didn't end with her death. It multiplied through every person we helped. The settlement money went to work immediately. I established the Sarah Mills Property Rights Foundation, providing free legal assistance to homeowners fighting HOA abuse and predatory development schemes. Meredith became the foundation's legal director, finally able to practice law without student loan payments that could choke a draft horse. Our first major project transformed 2 acres of the former construction site into the Heritage Oaks Community Garden, an organic farming cooperative that provided fresh vegetables for the local food bank and educational programs teaching sustainable agriculture to kids who thought carrots grew in plastic bags. The sight of children learning to plant seeds where Veronica had once planned to plant retail stores carried the kind of poetic justice that would have made Sarah clap her hands with delight. The foundation's work attracted statewide attention from legislators concerned about the growing cancer of HOA abuse. The Colorado General Assembly passed the Garrett Mills Act, strengthening mineral rights protections and requiring HOAs to disclose all property ownership complexities before initiating development projects over $1 million. A state ombudsman office was created specifically for property rights disputes, giving homeowners a weapon against institutional bullying that didn't require mortgaging their children's future to afford legal representation. Personal healing came gradually, like spring returning after the hardest winter on record. I kept the farmhouse and 5 acres, maintaining Sarah's vegetable garden, where tomatoes still grew fat and sweet in the summer sun. Earl continued ruling his chicken coop domain with the authority of a feathered dictator, completely unimpressed by the legal drama that had swirled around his territory. The sound of children laughing during agricultural education classes replaced the diesel rumble of construction equipment. The smell of fresh herbs growing in community garden plots erased the memory of concrete dust and betrayal. Evening air once again carried the scent of growing things instead of greed and corruption. Ezra moved to the adjacent property, continuing his veteran advocacy work while keeping watch for neighborhood developments that might threaten property rights. We still held our evening strategy sessions on the porch, though now they focused on helping other people fight their battles instead of planning our own war. Marcus Webb's investigative series won the Colorado Press Association's Award for Public Service Journalism, and documentary filmmakers optioned rights to tell the story of how patience, principle, and a 137-year-old deed defeated institutional corruption. On quiet evenings, I sit on the porch swing that still carries the faint scent of Sarah's lavender hand lotion, watching sunset paint the community garden gold while Earl announces the end of another successful day. The pink surveyor's stakes still mark my original property lines, now serving as boundary markers for organic farming plots where kids learn that real growth takes patience, good soil, and the kind of care that can't be rushed by bullies with golden scissors. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building something beautiful where someone else tried to plant ugliness, and letting that beauty grow wild enough to change the world. What would you do if your HOA tried to steal your land? Share your nightmare stories in the comments below. You might be our foundation's next case. Don't forget to subscribe to HOA Stories for more tales of fighting back against the bullies who think power makes them untouchable, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Remember, property rights protect everyone, but only if we're willing to fight for them.
That's a wrap for today's episode on HOA Stories. If you enjoyed watching Karma in action, smash that like button, comment your thoughts, and let us know if you've dealt with HOA madness too. Subscribe so you won't miss the next HOA meltdown we post.